Morning and comprehensive.
All right, so I just wanted to welcome everyone really quick. I'm Caitlin Vargas. I'm the Startup Community Director for Onward Eugene. You are at the Innovation Hub. Onward Eugene is an economic development nonprofit. We actually work out of the front space here, and we do a lot of great programs here, which you find out if you follow us on social media. I want to just introduce my colleagues real quick, and then we will get started with our panel presentation. Just pure logistics for today. We're going to be in here till about 5 o'clock. And then we'll transition out for delicious food and drinks and networking, where you can nail down one of these fine panelists or a moderator and ask more specific questions. We also have opportunities for one-on-one meetings tomorrow. So please talk to me if you're interested in that. So really quick, I want to introduce Matt Sayre, Managing Director of Onward Eugene.
I'm the only Matt. Oh, it's out of name tag. You got Matt Purvis, Matt Sayre, Matt Redhead.
Yeah, there you go.
3 Matts.
So if you just say like, hey, Matt, you got a good chance someone's going to.
We'll all jump to help.
Yeah.
They're just like nicknames for them all.
So if you need anything, we've got bottled water in the fridge. In the meantime, restrooms are right out here. Otherwise, we're going to encourage you to ask questions today. We're super excited you're all here. I'm going to introduce our moderator and then turn it over. So Matt Purvis, thank you so much for being here. We are so excited that you're here. And the floor is yours, my friend.
All right, thank you. So I've got a series of questions for our panelists, but if you guys see an angle there that might be just off, it might be more applicable to your business, please let me know. Jump in at any time, raise your hand, and let's make sure your question gets answered as cleanly and directly as possible, okay? We've got some experts here that are ready to rock. Let's get into it. I'll note the first question: what are the key benefits of engaging in international sales? And how do they differ from domestic sales? Now, the invitation to this event said something about make more money. So that's clearly, right, one of the benefits of international sales. So let's hit that. But what are the others? Go ahead.
Okay. So, a lot of our, let me start by giving you a background of what I do, right? So my name is Dr. Smriti Zanabal. I'm a scientist. I'm the founder of a medical device startup called Lazarus 3D. And what we do is we take body parts, so scans of body parts from MRIs or CTs, and create replicas of them using soft tissue 3D printing. So these replicas that we make are synthetic. They are not functional, but they're used by surgeons to rehearse their upcoming cases before they operate. And so in the US, this recently was deemed a medical device. So we went through the FDA and got regulatory approvals for it as a Class 2 510(k) cleared diagnostic tool. And there's also billing codes for reimbursement. So this all happened recently in the last year or two. Prior to that, we were using the same approach to create replicas of a patient, not the patient, but just a patient. And so what value does that bring to people? Well, if you're a medical student or if you're a resident or a fellow, then you are able to actually learn those skills on a human representation. And what value does it bring to my customers at the time? A lot of the other medical device companies, well, they create innovative tools so that surgeons can operate with them in the operating room, right? They don't know how to demonstrate the utility of those tools. They don't know how to train the people. So often, and this has been the case and it still is for the most part, they will bring those tools in the OR, like the rep will do that, and then the physician will use it on the patient. The patient doesn't really exactly know about all this happening. And then the assumption is that everyone's going to do the right thing. But really they're going to learn by operating with that new tool on that patient that day. And just fingers crossed type situation. So our technology alleviated that burden. And so a lot of the customers early on, before we knew that this was going to be a regulated platform and the FDA and billing codes and reimbursement processes would be involved, we were selling to the companies in the US. Companies like Boston Scientific, Pentax Medical, Carl Stores, Johnson & Johnson, names you may be familiar with. So those companies are not just in the US. They have their offices in many parts of the country. Those branches operate almost as their own entity. like, they don't even speak to the US people necessarily. So whatever the US team is doing, nobody else outside of the US knows what they're doing. They don't, like, they're too big. So, so we started working with those US teams, and even these companies have so many departments, they don't talk to each other. So, we just sort of like penetrated a department and then sort of like, spread out that way. And then when we would go to trade shows, those trade shows were international. The customers coming to them were these people's colleagues from Singapore or Japan or Malaysia or Brazil, and they wanted it too. So we're like, cool, so do you want any changes to this? Because everything we do is custom. They're like, nope, we want exactly this. And we're like, okay, cool, how many? And this was so new for us. We're like, what the hell are we doing? It was super confusing. And so then we just had to embrace that this is a thing that they all want. And we were confused at the beginning. We're like, do we need to adjust pricing? You know, all this, how are we going to do export? How are we going to ship? How are we going to make sure that it doesn't break during shipment, etc. And there was no other way to learn than to just do it. So we just went for it. And so then we ended up exporting to the counterparts of the existing US operation in these other places. And like in Canada and South America, Latin America, Asia, Australia. And so we didn't have to do any extra work, right? Because it's the same thing that we're providing, but we were just shipping it to other places. So it, yeah, brings you more money, and it's a great way to broaden your scope and to not limit yourself without even like, it is nothing that's overbearing or scary. It wasn't, it was just a learning process.
Did you change the price?
So we never, so we started with the same price, and we were thinking that maybe they would ask us for a discount, or maybe there would be like a budget situation. And there wasn't, so we just went with it.
All right, so what about, so the benefit of revenue is clear, obviously, everyone gets that. What about diversification of markets? Is there value in that?
Yes, I think so, because like you just become a name brand. And so for us, we're a startup and no one knows, or at the time, no one knew what Lazarus 30 was. And so now, so every time we would ship our products, if it was a training tool, and the salespeople are using it at their hospital, or they're using it at their trade show or their workshop, we started branding it Lazarus 30. So we started putting our name on it. And it never was a concern for the customer. They were like, yeah, you're a startup. I want you to succeed. So yeah, go ahead, put your name on it. Fine. And that helps with recognition, because now if there's a surgeon, like now there's a primary market and there's a secondary market. So they kind of went in reverse. I started with the secondary market, which was education and training. And we're moving into the primary market now, which is precision medicine. It helps because if there's a surgeon out in Singapore at a conference and they see the model, they're like, oh, Lazarus, I know that.
Okay, so one question for the audience here. What if, when the if that you're shipping, is it a standardized, let's say, abdomen of an individual that is a training tool? Because I know you're also doing customized product, like
Right.
my abdomen is recreated for actual surgical practice to fix whatever's wrong with me, right? So the it is two different things now,
Yes,
or is it
yes.
one thing?
So the it traditionally had been sort of a representation of a specific BMI individual with a specific disease state. And so it didn't mean that it was yours. It was just a representation, right? And so when those representations were used by these medical device companies or residency programs in various places, they were still learning the same skill, just not like so tailored to that upcoming procedure. That was the foundation for the traction that we built, because they got their hands on it and then they were like, well, what's next? Like, can we do this on a patient specific scale? And of course, the answer is yes. So it just like became a stepping stone for us to get into that next stage.
Okay, so Steve, could you introduce yourself and Haisam as well? and talk about some of the complexities that Lazarus went through in going from US customers to international.
Absolutely. So, Steve Thompson, I'm with Business Oregon. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I really am here to do that. So I'm part of the global trade team at Business Oregon, and our focus is helping Oregon companies identify international opportunities. And we offer a series of trainings and assistance financially to help you identify locations. My colleague Jason is from U.S. Commercial Service. And so we work closely together, we share leads, and one of the things that is unique about our organization is we are working exclusively with Oregon. So we have 3 contractors, the EU, Canada, and Japan, that are available to businesses in Oregon. And I've actually been in your spots on a number of occasions. I've got a pretty unique background, about 70% in the private sector and 30% in the public sector, and I've done a variety of startups, so I know where you're at. 95% of the world's population is outside of the US, and about 75% of the consumer is outside the US. That is one of the main benefits. Number one. Number two is when you have a lull in sales in the US, you could have an increase in sales in an international market, and therefore you're keeping your spectrum going in the same direction, which is hopefully up. The third thing, and I think to Sriti's point, is that generally you have higher margins internationally. There can be an additional cost to doing international sales, but generally you don't have to discount because you don't have the same level of competition if you have a unique product. So it can be complex. Sriti and I were talking earlier, there are specific codes that you have to abide by if you are shipping something internationally. Over $2,500 requires extra paperwork. Once you get that paperwork done, then you know what it is and you have it in your system, and the U.S. Customs Department will have you in their system as well. Under $2,500, single page. So there are other complexities in terms of how do you get started? Where do you find the locations? How do you partner with people? How do you do your distribution? How do you identify a market, and why would you change things up for that market? Why not just keep it the same as you're selling in the US? And that's localization. What you want to do is you want to approach each market that you pursue as if it were in the local market itself. So you may have to change the color of your packaging. You may have to change the language and the way that you phrase things. You may have to have a distributor there because maybe that's the only way that you can break into the market, but then eventually you can get your foothold on your own.
Excellent. You want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I'm coming through okay, beaming down to you all from Portland. I'm very sorry I couldn't be there in person. I got snowed in, and everything is getting better, but it's still. You can hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Excellent. So I'm Haysam Shah. I'm with the U.S. Commercial Service. We are the U.S. Department of Commerce's export promotion arm. We take great pride in our backyard approach. So I sit in our Portland office. We cover all of Oregon, and we are tasked by Congress to help U.S. companies sell their goods and services overseas. And the underlying mandate is to retain and create U.S. jobs by promoting exports. I think Steve touched on the number that wakes me up in the morning and that I think of when I sleep at night. 70% of the world's purchasing power is beyond our borders. So even if everyone in the country was buying your goods and services, you're still 70% away from your potential. I think what makes our process very unique and why we have succeeded in helping so many companies, and we've been around since the 80s, I want to say, the U.S. Commercial Service in its current form, as our overseas presence. So think of a US embassy or consulate around the world. Um, the vast majority of them will have Department of Commerce staff housed in that embassy or consulate. And what that does is it gives you as a small business, you have access to someone on the ground who has a security clearance, who works for the US government, speaks the local language. Our staff over there are citizens of that country, and have networks, piles of business cards that have been collected over decades. And their entire objective is to help you find the correct distributor, agent, and user. So we have presence in 82 countries around the world, and I think close to 100 with our State Department partners. And we have helped countless businesses from across the United States find their overseas sales channels. The benefits to international sales are tremendous. I think one of the biggest hurdles and the vast majority of our efforts, as Steve very eloquently puts, we are government and we are here to help. We focus on the small and medium-sized companies because the big ones don't really need our help as much. But one of the biggest hurdles, and I think it rings true, is the psychological barrier, right? Like when you start looking into the initial questions of, it's so easy for me to put something up on Amazon and get it sold, versus how do I get this to a freight forwarder? How do I get it to clear customs? How do I get to make sure that the labels are correct and it it has the right sort of legislation on the product itself? Those are the questions that really put people off from exporting, but that's what we're here for. So turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Smriti. I want to put that back on you a little bit. If those words that a politician years ago said were the 9 scariest words in the English language, have you found that to be the case, or have you found real assistance in getting Lazarus into international markets?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's been a little bit different. All those sales happened organically. Like we weren't seeking those customers. They just like found us because we were already working with their US counterparts, right? But it's true. The psychology of being okay with shipping to another country that's daunting, I think. It was for us too. And we didn't know, like, well, have we filled everything out correctly? Like, if you've ever sent an international shipment, you'll know that you have to submit like 3 copies of the commercial invoice. And if it is over 2,500 or under 2,500, and it's a commercial commodity, then you have to put that EEI, which is the electronic information, something, hold on, I have it here. Okay, electronic export information document. And you have to put your any declaration of anything, right? And so that's just like already daunting. And then if you want to put fragile stickers on it and like what else needs to happen. And then also the description of it. Like I can't write body parts on my stuff. Then the customer is definitely going to have it and not release it. So I have to write stuff like educational models, not for human use, not biologic, non-toxic, do not eat. I literally write that. So like learning that and learning it, knowing that it may not work with your first shipment. I think that is like your biggest hurdle. And then every country that you ship to, it will be different. Like shipping to Dubai, it just shows up like next day, no problem. Express, FedEx Express just shows up next day, no problem. We shipped to Portugal, it was stuck in customs for 3 weeks. And so then we're like, okay, we're gonna ship to Barcelona, no problem. Portugal, problem. It's like, what is going on here, right? Like they're just next to each other, but it's drastically different. And so I think that, yeah, like it's scary, but I don't think it's, now it's, we do it all the time. Now, like this week alone, we shipped to like 5 different countries and it wasn't any big deal because we knew that we have to have our EEI, we knew we had to have our, let me tell you, there's a bunch of acronyms. Okay, so there's a Schedule B number. The Schedule B number, like you look at the, first of all, like if you're shipping with FedEx, you'll look at the instructions and then it'll tell you that the page does not exist. So you're like, wow, off to a great start, right? It won't give you the information. So then you have to go to the customs and what is it? The Customs and Border Protection website, the CPB. And there you will find instructions of like, okay, this is your code for the Schedule B number. And then there's a generator for that number. So you have to go on that website and like generate your number. Then take that number and fill it out when you're filling out your EEI form. And then in the EEI form, it will give you more instructions. And so it's like a process, but once you've done it once, you're like, oh, I got this. Like next time, no big deal. And yeah, it's going to be different depending on what commodity you're shipping, like we talked about that. So if you're shipping food and beverage, if you're shipping documents, if you're shipping electronic, like a flash drive with information on it, you have to declare what information is on it. Like it's very, very important that you do that and you do it accurately without oversharing and sharing if it is sensitive creatively, right? So so you have to share any, even if you're sending like physical papers or brochures, you still have to declare it. And so then the first time we were shipping, we obviously hadn't done any of this. And we were just winging it and seemed to have made it. So we were like, okay, we're just gonna keep doing that. But we were really small, like nobody would have cared. It was like a few $100s worth of product. And then it became tens of thousands of dollars worth of product. And we were like, we can't just go on with life like this. Like we have to change this and learn the new system. So I called Steve up and I was like, Steve, I need help. And I was fully panicked and he gave me good resources. So yeah.
You know what might be helpful too, to add to Matt's question is to talk a little bit about your experience from Texas to here.
Yeah, so it turns out that there is a export assistance program. Is that what it's called?
EPP,
Yeah.
But no, moving why you came here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened is we were in Texas and in Houston and we started there. It was great. We knew that the resources existed, but no one like brought it to our attention. No one relayed information. I think people were just like not interested in sharing and just keeping it to themselves. And that's really not been the case after we moved to Oregon. So even actually before we moved to Oregon, before we made the decision, we'd already been scouting options. And so when we reached out to the universities here and we reached out to the government, folks like just the mayor's office or the governor's office, they were like, yeah, there are all these things that we can do to help and support small businesses like you. And they're like, yeah, we have, you know, these incubators, these accelerators, these collaborations, the state supports and has grant funds to match your SBIR grants up to a certain dollar amount, etc. And so it just seemed like really inviting. So when we got here, it turns out that I went to Oregon Bio, we're in the biotech health tech space. And so they introduced me to Business Oregon and all this information sharing is just like happening. We had support from the city of Albany. So I'm up in Albany and they had a sustainability grant that we got funding through, there was a support grant during COVID that all we had to do was apply and just like, we got, it wasn't a whole lot of money. It was $1,500, but we got it. And it was like, well, all I had to do was fill this application out and submit my tax return. And that was it. And then Business Oregon, there is a EPP program and it has been game changing. Like before we would be like so stressed out about picking one event and that would be our event for the whole year. And it would be such a cost burden for us, right? And you have to do that because that's how you're going to get anything out of it. Like that's how you're gonna get your customers. But at the beginning, it's really daunting to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to spend $15,000 to go exhibit at this trade show. And that's like the low end of the budget, right? So with Business Oregon and the EPP program, we're like, okay, we can go to 3. And that was really cool. Like that had not been an opportunity for us prior. So having financial assistance, having like even moral support, like if I'm panicked, like I mentioned, I was at one point, I can just call somebody and be like, I need help with this thing. And now we're trying to bring a regulated product that is a medical device into other countries. And that had been like, again, that panic mode of like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so Steve and I were in San Diego last year, and we were at the Bio International Conference, and he just like brought me over to the UAE pavilion, and we're chatting with these people, and I don't know who they are, but Steve is like really confident. He's like, oh yes, and I want you to meet the Ministry of Health folks here, and these people that like connect US businesses to businesses in Dubai and the UAE. And so I'm talking to them and I was like, yeah, okay, like nothing's gonna come out of this. And then I get back and these people are emailing us back and forth, and there's like exchange of information and NDAs. And before we know it, like a few months, like I think it was like 6 months, we are ready to go. We're entering contract phase with a business in Abu Dhabi that turns out to be a exporter and distributor of medical devices. And they want to bring it to the hospitals there. And so literally my co-founder, who is the CEO of Lazarus 3D, Chuck, flew out to Abu Dhabi and met with the partners, and then flew out again like last month to build that relationship and establish grounds to get started. And so this all actually happened, right? And none of this would have happened, I think, if it hadn't been for the support from the state of Oregon. And if it hadn't been that sponsorship that supported us to be at the Bio International Convention to begin with, right? Or that intro, like none of it. So I think that there's a big difference. I always say this, Matt knows this, Oregon is like a hidden gem and people just don't know. Like, I hope that we all can appreciate what we have here, because outside of here, it's not like this. People are selfish.
So this is a perfect example, but let's maybe take a step back. Haysom and Steve, could you talk a little bit more about the resources, literal resources and support that are available, like Smriti had just explained, for other businesses to develop international markets?
Absolutely. Hazel, why don't you start? I'll let you, since you're looking down at us.
This is my
It feels-
big brother for sure.
God, looking down at us.
It feels really awkward, guys. I kind of like want to, can we zoom me out or something and like shrink me? I just want to be life-sized. I think Steve, I'll let you take the thunder with the STEP grant, but the resources that we offer are a variety of services that are extremely subsidized. They are paid for. We are Congress has asked us to conduct cost recovery. So we're supposed to be not using tax dollars to support those businesses in a literal sense. So just a quick example, we have a matchmaking service. So Smriti, back to your Dubai example, let's say you hadn't met Steve and hadn't connected with those folks on the floor at the show. We could do a matchmaking service where the US Embassy staff will identify and connect with potential buyers or partners, or whether it's the ministry, whoever the interlocutor is, set that meeting up for you and attend the meeting with you, and then follow up later on. And that is for 5 of those meetings, that's $950. And then that's where Steve's help comes in. So I'll quickly, but that's just a quick example. There's a whole palette of services that's on our trade.gov website, but whether you want to take the sniper approach or a shotgun approach, we can set you up with all of those. But
What's that word? Interlocking?
Interlaken's a lake in Switzerland and it's beautiful, but interlocutor is
It was
a
close to that. Like a broker in between or something.
correct, an entity that partakes. I will put it in the chat box and see if that is really big on the screen as well.
It won't be as big as you.
Thanks.
Well, I'm gonna add to Hasem's comment, and I'm fortunate to have actually taken advantage of the program that he's talking about, which is called the Gold Key. So I led a delegation of 3 companies to Southeast Asia in October, Indonesia, Singapore, and Japan. And this was for advanced manufacturing. So the purpose there was to identify potential partners, joint venture opportunities, possibly even sales opportunities. Part of that was a trade show. And so I was the only one that ended up going to Japan, and I was looking for some very specific things. So I engaged with Hasem's team in Japan to identify some prospective companies and organizations that I could talk to while I was there. And so, and this was a pretty grueling trip. It was 42.5 hours just to get to Jakarta, about 2.5 days. And then on the way back from Singapore to Japan was 11 hours. And then I got into my hotel room at 1:45 in the morning at a 9 o'clock briefing, and his team had set up 8 meetings for me that day. So yeah, so I mean, I looked at it, I was on fumes, but it was good fumes. And so it was like from 9 until 4 with a half-hour lunch break. But they did an amazing job of finding these specific entities that I wanted to talk to as a state representative. So I can personally attest to it. We, as Business Oregon, they are one of our primary partners. They happen to be across the hall from us in the World Trade Center in Portland. We also have a relationship with the US, with XM Bank, which is the Export-Import Bank of the US. So if you're worried about making a transaction with somebody internationally, the government has an entity that will mitigate the risk for you. It's an insurance policy against loss. So they'll reimburse you up to 95% of the cost if the person that you're dealing with turns out to be a bad actor. The second thing they do is they offer short and long-term financing for projects. If you wanted to compete with somebody and you've got another country that's competing against you for your product set, then they will support you in that case. And then there's the Small Business Administration. So what people don't realize is that there's a whole department within the Small Business Administration called the SBA Office of International Trade. So they will support international trade as well. Interestingly enough, even if you do not ship out of the United States. So if you are shipping your goods and services or your goods to another company that is finishing that product out of state, but it's going international, then you can get either a loan or a line of credit through them, up to $5 to $7 million. And then we have our program, which is called the Export Promotion Program. And that includes an organization called STEP, which is a state trade expansion program that's through the Small Business Administration. So they give each of the states a pool of money, and then we disperse that money to companies in Oregon that are interested in attending a trade show, a trade mission. If you want to do web localization, so you have a contact in Germany and your website is all in English and you want to be local, so you now put a German flag up on your website, and the company that, well, there are several companies that do this, but they magically make it transform into German. And so the local Germans will look at that and say, I think back to your first point, why do business internationally? What the challenge is? Okay, I'm now dealing in their mind with a German company because you've taken the time to go through that process of converting or adding to your site in their language And maybe you even focus in a specific area in Germany. The other thing that we do is, if you are looking to do e-commerce, which is part of the world now, we can assist in helping offset some of the finance costs for e-commerce. If you're going to a trade show or you're attending a trade mission, we will offer up to 50%. Used to be 75%, so Shruti has had the opportunity to do that, but it's back to pre-pandemic time. So it's 50% of the cost of the trade show booth, of the airfare, of hotels, local transportation, shipping costs if you have to ship the booth or you have to ship collateral materials. We also offset the cost of your collateral materials, and in some cases, even a website in advance of that. So we were doing 3. We're now doing 2 events per year, up to $10,000 per event. We're close to being tapped out for this year, but we will be getting another round of funding. We'll know about it in September, and then in October, it'll actually be available.
Fiscal year.
So this is, we have 3 years that we follow within our department. So we've got the traditional January through December, and then the state follows a July 1 through June 30th timeframe. And then the federal fiscal year is October 1 through September 29. It's actually for the STEP program. For everybody else, it's September 30th. But there's an application on our website. You apply for it. We have a conversation in advance, and then we talk about what you want to do. And then part of what we do, we mentioned earlier, we have those contractors that are handling, probably a third of the world or half of the world, that we make available to you as a business owner to identify those additional resources. You can use that in conjunction with Hasten's Gold Key program or a variety of other tools. And then we ourselves are specialists in specific areas. So mine happens to be high tech, which is semiconductor, electronics manufacturing, software and IT. And then I also do clean tech and energy. And then I do bioscience, life science, and medical device. So.
Can I just say something? So the Business Oregon website is like the easiest website to get onto. They don't make it work against you. It's like really made for you. And once you log in and you are applying for the EPB program, it's so easy. Like it's really simple. There is no jargon or minimal jargon. And if you're confused, again, there's a human that you can call, and like Jessica works with Steve, and like she's awesome, and she'll just help you, and it's incredible. So my friends in Houston were like, what are you talking about? What is this program? And they're all confused, and they're like, well, should we be moving to Oregon too? And I'm like, yeah, you should. And so,
Nice work.
right, and so I'm still working on it.
Eugene, right? You gotta move
Yeah.
down.
Sure.
How we doing?
Sure, I'm so it's fine. But I actually really like Albany because I was at an event in Portland yesterday at the TAO, and then I came down to Eugene. I don't know Eugene, so it works nicely for me. But yes, sure, Eugene. So so I wanted to share the resources with them, but I'm like, well, maybe it's just in Oregon. So I pick up the phone, I call Steve, and Steve tells me that this is not just in Oregon, this is in Texas too. And I was like, wait, the STEP program is in Texas? And he's like, yeah, didn't you know about that? And I didn't. No one knows. And so, so my friends went on the website, and it turns out that their application was closed. They had to click all these links to like just get to it. It was super convoluted. And finally, after like 2 smart people, with PhDs working on this for like a couple of hours, they were able to together figure out the page. And then it turns out that they could not apply because it was closed anyway. There was no instructions or sort of like next step, like, oh, it's gonna open up again on this day, come back. It wasn't like that. It was just like, nope, it's closed. And it was just really very, very frustrating for them, right? So in comparison, the Business Oregon website, it's like, click here to register. Oh, wow, like an email confirmation has been sent. like, come back here to apply, and you apply and then you're done. And then like within a week, you'll hear back, like, yeah, your application has been accepted.
And if I could just, I just want to quickly add and underscore something that both of you touched on. I think we've gotten into the nitty gritty, right? Of like Steve threw a bunch of acronyms out, all these grants and resources. I'm telling you about a charge service. What I think is really important to take away is your consultation and that first call, whether it's with me or with Steve or my team in Japan or in Indonesia or in Singapore, that's all free. And that conversation can go on for a really long time. There is no limit to how many emails you can send me and how many Teams calls we set up or how many times I come visit your office. So that I think is your underlying most valuable resource, is understanding the ecosystem, who's around, who can you talk to, whether it's if you're a food and bev company, ODA, USDA, Foreign Agriculture Service, give them a call. These are resources that you have at your disposal, and they'll open up the palette of what else may be available.
Hassan, do you guys work with the American Chamber of Commerce in Dubai?
Yes, we do. So I was actually posted overseas in Saudi Arabia. That was my last my last term, and I was very close with the AmCham over there. We are very well connected. The relationship varies from country to country, but we are generally very well connected with AmChams across the world. The one in Dubai is a particularly
Okay.
close relationship.
That's really cool. Okay, so there was an event this year, and I think that for whatever reason, there was like some limited funding and budget cuts. So that's just in the trend, right? 2023. So nonetheless, we really wanted to go to this conference, Arab Health, and so we went, and we didn't exhibit there, but we went and showed up anyway. And so we're in the elevator, and I wasn't there; it was my team. And so they show up at the elevator. And they're talking to this woman, and she's like, "Oh, where are you from?" Or "You're from the US. Oh, okay, what do you do?" And she's like, "Oh, I work here. I work at the AmCham Dubai. And by the way, I'm headed to the AmCham breakfast. You guys should join me." And so this is like happening in the elevator. She invites my colleagues to go in her car with her to that breakfast. And so they're at this breakfast. Turns out the CEO of Stanford Health is just like casually on the panel at that event. And the neurosurgeon is on there too. And that Children's National is on there too. Like all these hospital people, decision makers are on this panel in that room. And turns out that there was a reception that, you know, you'd have to be invited to, obviously, and probably pay piles of money to get in. And this all had been planned out like months in advance. So there's this guy, and he's like, "Oh, I really want to chat with you from Children's National, and I'm going to be at this reception. Are you going to be there?" Because they all assume that they're all going to be there, right? And so, of course, we're not invited, and we barely made it to the breakfast, which we were also not invited to. So we go to the organizers of that reception. We're like, "Look, man, I'm not gonna eat your food. I'm not gonna drink your drinks. Like, I just need to go meet that surgeon, right? Can you please let me in?" And they were like, "Okay, yeah, it's fine." And so they're like, "Just come and just sign me in the evening, and I will let you in," right? And so they show up, everyone's pulling out their invites and like scanning their badges and their COVID cards. And my team members had none of that. And so they just showed up, and then they were like panicking. They're like, "Oh, I don't have this fancy invite to pull out." And they're kind of in a frenzy. And so this person pulls them aside from AmCham, and they're like, "Yeah, they're with me." And they just like let them in. And then there's this big gigantic party with fireworks and like shows in front of the Burj Khalifa, like no big deal. And they meet their surgeon target person, and it all worked out. So now when we got there, my team members didn't even know that AmCham was part of this conference or their existence or the people that are behind the scenes organizing it. I obviously didn't know that, you know, our team in Oregon here is working with those people too. So next year, obviously, I'm gonna plan this all a little bit differently, but it all happened, right? And I think that none of it would have, again, if we hadn't met and done that intro at the bio convention and bothered to like go back to Dubai, even with limited funding as a startup, to be at our help to meet with those partners from Abu Dhabi.
All right, so when you open a door with Steve or with Haytham, many other doors are there. I just want to look to the group here. Is anyone here already doing international sales, international export? Okay, there's a couple of hands. So let's let's step back a little bit. Lazarus is kind of blowing up for all the reasons that you've been describing. But how do you go about researching potential international markets for products or services for the folks who may be here? What are the first steps, Steve and Mason? How would you address that?
Oh, we got 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
I'll take a quick stab. So I think following the data is the great rule of thumb, right? You want to look at, and there's plenty of tools that'll help you do that. Google has a great trade platform that very closely monitors what's moving where. So to find your lowest hanging fruit, you always want to get a sense of what products are being imported where and what countries have more of a demand for US products. Then you also want to take a quick look at barriers to trade and see if the pipeline is smooth, if it's easy to get your product out there, if the tariffs aren't too high, then that makes it an easier target for you. We have a lot of internal resources that we use. We have our market diversification tool, which is free, where you can just pop in your HS code, which you now know how to find thanks to Smriti's introduction, and your Schedule B number, and that will pop out. It'll show you a map, and it'll show you a whole matrix on what are some really good potential targets for you. So follow the data, do the research, and then give us a call. We set up that introductory call with, say, your team in Germany, or our team in Germany, and get a sense of a qualitative assessment of what the market may look like. And so when you have all of that in your hands, you can make a really solid decision.
I'm going to add to that too. So they have a fantastic team. There's about 1,000 of us globally that do what Haytham does. And there are trainings available through his team, through our team. And then there's also a really fantastic resource called export.gov that you can go to. And on there, you can create your own export plan. There's a whole outline for you there. You fill in the details. You can print it out for yourself. It's really, really knowledgeable and helpful. XM Bank, so xm.gov is another one where if you're thinking about a market and you're questioning it, or you heard something positive or negative, they have what's called a CLS, Country of Limitation Schedule. You can look on there, and if there is a black X going through that country, that means you don't want to do business there. It's not yet. The other thing is that we both have a tremendous amount of contacts. As I mentioned early on, the majority of my background is in the private sector. I've done multiple startups. I've gone from pure sales to running companies. So I've developed extensive contact lists over the years. I make my contacts available to my clients, which is very unusual. The other thing is, I was telling Matt early on, I'm also in a unique role in that I have taken advantage of the program that Smriti has taken advantage of, this STEP program, on my own when I was in the private sector. So I went to Germany for Hannover Messe, which is the largest industrial automation show in the world. And I was able to be part of the Oregon booth. And I got 50% of my travel expenses. And we did a flyer in German. We changed our website. We did a whole bunch of things and made that all part of the package. So I truly believe that I can't say there's nothing that we can't answer, but I would say there's probably 99.8 or 9% that we can. So, and so my comment is, if there's something that you're looking for, we may not know the answer to every question, but we'll know someone that will.
Great. Let me hit this final question here. Can you guys share some other success stories or case studies of companies that have been really successful expanding internationally? And what lessons can other companies learn from those examples? Does anything stand out?
Jason?
Yeah, if I'm understanding correctly, the majority of the audience is tech related, right? We're all, or are we scattered across industries, or are there a lot of different verticals in the room?
Hands up for tech.
Hands up if you're tech.
Okay.
A few hands. Yeah, I wanted to highlight a tech company that's a little. So we cover Oregon and Southwest Washington, and we've been working with this company called Digital Harvest. They are a ag tech. They're a prediction tool. They're a software as a service. They use data to predict crop yield for the sugar industry. So naturally, their entire market is overseas, right? They're following where the sugar cane, where the fields are, and they're finding ways to make that process more efficient, digitize it with satellite imagery, and relieve the burden on people and farmers on the ground and the mills themselves. They have used so many of our services and so much of our, they've kind of leveraged our matchmaking program, the one Steve was talking about, to start off in the Dominican Republic and then go over to Indonesia and India and knock on doors in Malaysia. Didn't quite work out, but got introduced to someone in Vietnam. Turns out there's sugar in Vietnam. Then went over to Guatemala, then to Honduras. And all of it was through our teams and through these individual phone calls. Their sales went up, I think 4 to 500x, and all within a couple of years. And they just kind of just kept pushing forward. We work very closely with them, and it's just been since I joined the Portland office. So that's how quickly fortunes can turn. They went from a 2-person company and they now have 7 people, and they're looking at hiring even more. These are permanent full-time jobs. So that's just a quick example. With the tech world, things move quick. Government doesn't move as quick. We'll just be very honest. And so it's sometimes that divide takes a little bit longer, but then there's plenty of the bigger examples. There are companies that have used the advocacy services where the US government actually lobbies on your behalf if you're going for an international tender and there's no other US competition. And that is, I think, one of the most powerful examples of how having the US government in your corner can help you secure an absolutely trajectory changing deal. But yeah, plenty of examples and definitely more to draw from if we have more context on those.
Great, thanks, Jason. We have 2 minutes, Steve.
2 minutes, it'll take 30 seconds. So I want to add something to what Hasten was saying is, he's talking about a company that even though their data, they're agriculture related, there's an organization, it's not just us that has funding available, there's multiple organizations throughout the state and throughout the country. One is called WUSADA, which is Western U.S. Agricultural Trade Association, and they will provide up to $1.5 million in marketing money for a company over 3 years. There's also ports, so the Port of Portland and the port down in Southern Oregon will also assist if there's a port-related event going on and you want to go somewhere or you want their support. And then the third thing would be Travel Oregon. So Travel Oregon has money available if you are looking to go overseas for an event and they bring companies together and then you become part of their trade show or trade mission along the way. So it's not just us, there's multiple. Am I under the 2 minutes?
You made it, and with our last 30 seconds, are there any other specific questions from the group? Anything you guys would like to hear from the panel on that we haven't covered yet? Right here.
Like you mentioned barriers earlier, how have some of your identities created barriers for international sales and trade? Or have any of your identities allowed you to step in the doors that some of your colleagues couldn't?
Want to take that? Jason?
Yeah, sure. The if the barriers to trade that if I understood your question correctly, that what are some of the most critical barriers to trade, and how have the companies we've worked with overcome them?
Now, I'm speaking about individual identity, like your identity, however you identify the various ones you have they been barriers or have they allowed you to walk into certain doors?
Oh, that's a good one. As a first generation Pakistani American, my parents are Pakistani. I grew up abroad. I have definitely experienced the full palette of barriers in many different ways. I think the the first thing that I will touch on is the my organization, the department, and our agency is very actively and very intentionally working to overcome barriers to trade and to personal growth. We have what we're calling the Global Diversity Export Initiative. We've President Biden and his team has launched this since he very soon after he took office. This is coming straight from the White House, and we are tasked with helping historically underserved businesses that have not had an even access to the resources over time. And so as a first generation, as someone who identifies as a minority, it gives me great pride that we're working on this particular initiative. And we are laser focused on helping companies that have otherwise been disadvantaged. Personally, I think it's important to understand and accept privilege however it comes and however we see it. And I can say that coming from a relatively stable economic background, there is privilege that I accept. But America in 2023, as brown guy coming from Muslim parents, it's we all face our difficulties. Post 9/11 was a hard time for all of us, but um, it's something you can see the baby steps moving forward. And I think as a department and as an agency, I'm very proud of the work that we're doing and the steps we're taking to move forward.
I
know,
wanna
we're
add,
slightly, yeah.
so really quickly, gender biases, that's real, and it's not even that we don't see it in the US, of course, we have it in the US too, but culturally, that's also a thing, right? So you have to remember that in other countries, women, and not to mention again in the US that this is already a problem here, women are not typically, the president or the CEO of the organization that is going to these international trade events and engaging with these other leaders from other countries, representing their organizations and being the face of their company and having these negotiations on the table. That's like sometimes just not the thing that happens. So if I'm at a trade show and I'm like manning my booth and, hanging out, talking to people and engaging with them, somebody from an international country may come by and say, oh, who can I speak with to negotiate, the cost for this stuff? Like, how do I, who do I speak with to sort of like discuss the finances? And it's like, cool. Clearly you do not want to speak with me. So that's clear, right? Just the fact that the question was asked.
Yeah.
Who do I speak with? Is like, right? Yeah. So clearly not me. And in the beginning, it was infuriating. And so for a lot of those opportunities, our team is very, very focused on like empowering, these types of, like whether you're female, whether you're minority, whether you're, coming from a background that you felt non-empowered. Like we have people that don't have degrees and they feel empowered because of that. So stuff like that, right? And so we would just like say, hey, look, man, like you clearly have a bias that you are bringing baggage with you, and we don't want to do business with you. So that was obviously like, that was like a bold move. And at the beginning we did that. And then we realized like that's not exactly. And so, then we would do things like this, right? So here's one example. We would say, oh, well, the president of this company is like obviously busy at this time, but if you come back in 15 minutes, I'll have you introduced to them. And so then they come back in 15 minutes. And I'll be like, hi, I'm the president of the company. And that was it.
All right, great. Well, I think we've got a little bit over. I want to thank you guys very much. Put up a round of applause for the panel. Also, thanks to Asim for the big screen. You did fantastic on that. So thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Can we get a round of applause for our moderator, Matt? Haysom, you're not here for the party, so we're gonna have to live it up without you. So next up, we have a social hour. You guys learned a lot today. So now's your opportunity to talk to Steve, Smitri, and Matt, ask more questions. We're gonna be sending out a follow-up email after this. So Sky right here will have a piece of paper you write your email on if you didn't register in advance, so we can send contact information for everyone that you heard from today. So if you guys are ready, one last round of applause, and then we'll head out here for some food. Great, love you guys. Now the line starts.